The chandeliers burned like 1,000 captured stars, and beneath them 500 wolves in the skin of men and women turned in the oldest dance in the kingdom. They called it the mating ball of the winter moon, the most coveted invitation in all of Caldris. One night a year, when the 7 great packs gathered under one roof draped in silk and velvet and old family jewels, and searched each other's faces for the one thing gold could not buy: a fated mate. And through the middle of all that glittering hope, carrying a crystal decanter heavier than her own thin arms, walked a girl no one saw. Her name was Leora Ashvane. Not that anyone in that room would have known it. Not that anyone would have cared. She kept to the edges. She always kept to the edges, because that was where a servant belonged, and because after 3 days without food, the edges were the only place with a wall she could lean on when the floor began to tilt. 3 days. 3 days since Lady Morwenna had decided that a bowl of broth was too much mercy for a girl who existed without permission. "Straighten up," a voice whispered close to her ear. Renna, small, round-faced, fierce as a terrier, and the only person in this entire cold palace who had ever looked at Leora like she was a person, and not a piece of furniture that occasionally needed dusting. "If the steward sees you swaying, he'll send word to your aunt. And then nothing worse than she's already done," Leora murmured. But she straightened. Because Renna's hand was on her back, and Renna had saved half a heel of bread for her, and you did not throw kindness back in the face of the one person who had any to give. Through the great archway, the nobility of the 7 packs shimmered. Diamonds at their throats, firelight in their wine. Their laughter rising up into the vaulted ceiling like smoke, like it belonged there. Like the whole gilded world had been built for the sole purpose of holding them up. Leora was not one of them. Leora was nothing. She had made her peace with that a long time ago. Or so she told herself, which is a different thing entirely from actually making peace. But it was the lie that got her through the nights, so she kept it close. "The high table needs more wine." The head steward's voice cut through the corridor like a whip. "Now, girl. Now." She lifted the decanter. The weight of it sent white sparks bursting across her vision, and for one long swaying second, the whole ballroom smeared into ribbons of gold. 1 foot, then the other. That was all this was. 1 foot in front of the other, across a marble floor the size of a frozen lake. She could do that. She had done harder things than walk. So she walked. The dancers parted around her without seeing her. To them, she was a draft, a shadow, the faint suggestion of a girl. She had spent her whole life learning how to be invisible, and tonight, at the worst possible moment, her body had finally mastered the lesson so completely that it was disappearing right out from under her. She was halfway across when she felt it. A prickle at the back of her neck, light as breath, like fingertips trailing down her spine. Someone was watching her, not glancing, not the accidental sweep of a bored eye across the help. Watching. The kind of watching that had weight to it. The kind that made the small hairs on her arms lift. And against every ounce of good sense she had ever owned, Leora looked up. The world stopped. He sat at the center of the high table, raised above every other soul in the room, on a throne of black iron and moonstone. She knew who he was. Everyone knew who he was. Renaud Duskmere, the Alpha King of Caldris, the youngest wolf ever to claim the Iron Throne, the one who had bound 7 warring packs into a single crown before his 25th year through blood, through battle, through a will that people said had no bottom to it. The whispers had not prepared her. I was carved out of shadow and silver. A jaw you could cut your hand on. Dark hair falling loose across his brow. And his eyes pale, pale gold, the exact color of a winter moon low on the horizon, were fixed on her. On her. Why is he looking at me, she thought. And then the thought scattered like startled birds, because the decanter had become a boulder in her grip, and her knees had stopped taking orders, and the marble was rushing up to meet her. She never hit the floor. Arms caught her. Fast. Impossibly unnaturally fast, wrapping around her waist before the crystal even left her fingers. The decanter shattered somewhere far below, wine spreading across the white marble like something darker than wine. But Leora barely heard it, barely felt the cold that should have come, because all she could feel was heat. Heat pouring off the body, pressed against hers, searing through the thin fabric of her servant's dress wrapping around her, like the first fire after a lifetime of winter. I have you. The voice came low and rough, so close it moved through her own chest like thunder rolling in from a great distance. She forced her eyes open, and found herself staring directly into molten gold. The Alpha King held her. He had crossed 30 feet of crowded ballroom in the space between one heartbeat and the next. He had left his throne moved faster than any wolf had a right to move, and caught a starving servant girl before she could break apart on the floor, like the crystal in her hand. 500 people had gone silent. Your Majesty. The steward's voice climbed high and thin with panic. Forgive this disgrace. The girl will be dealt with. I'll remove her at once from your sight. You will not touch her. The words were quiet. They landed like a mountain. The steward's mouth opened, closed. Sire, I said. The king's gold eyes had not once left Leora's face. You will not touch her. And in the ringing silence that followed, 500 wolves stood frozen, watching their king cradle a nobody against his chest as though she were made of something precious. Leora's heart slammed against her ribs. This close, she could see the strange thing happening to his eyes, the black centers spreading, swallowing the gold, until only thin, bright rings of it remained. His nostrils flared, and across his face came shock, then a slow, dawning recognition, then something darker and hungrier that had no name she knew. What is your name? He demanded. Leora. Barely a breath. Leora Ashvane. A murmur moved through the crowd, like wind through dry grass. Ashvane. The fallen house. The bloodline stripped of its name and its lands 15 years ago, when a scholar and his wife had died under circumstances no one was permitted to speak of. Leora. The king spoke it slowly, turned it over, tasted it as though it were a word in a language he had been trying to remember his whole life. His arm tightened around her. When did you last eat? The question was so unexpected, so gently wrong, that the truth simply fell out of her. 3 days ago, something dangerous flickered behind his eyes, and low in his chest against her body, she felt it a growl quiet, and barely leashed a sound that had nothing human left in it. Who, he said, and his voice rang out across the whole silent room, is responsible for this girl? The crowd parted, and Lady Morwenna stepped forward pale beneath her powder, her chin lifted in that way Leora knew so well. The way that meant she had already decided how this story would be told. I am her guardian, your Majesty, smooth as poured cream, her aunt by marriage, and I assure you whatever this display is, it is entirely of the girl's own making. You starved her. not a question. Your Majesty, she is prone to dramatics. I have given her every. I can smell the lie on your breath. The ballroom erupted, because the Alpha King's gift for scenting a falsehood was the stuff of legend. And to use it here now publicly, to strip a noble woman bare before the entire court. This girl, Renaud, went on, and his voice dropped to something cold and final, and absolutely without mercy, does not leave this palace tonight, nor any night hereafter. Lyora's heart stopped. You cannot simply take my ward, Morwenna sputtered. I am your king. I can do a great many things. He finally looked away from Lyora and turned the full weight of that gold stare on her aunt. And I wish for this woman to remain under my protection. On what grounds? The king smiled. It was not a kind smile. On the grounds that she is mine. The word hit the room like a struck bell. Mine. It rolled out across the marble and the silk and the diamonds, over the gasps and the whispers and the pounding of Lyora's own heart, until it was the only thing left in the whole vast room. She opened her mouth to protest, to demand what in the name of the moon he thought he was doing. To tell him that she was no one's, least of all a king's. But the darkness was already rising at the edges of her sight, and the last thing she saw before it took her was his face above hers, gold eyes blazing with a fierce and terrible possession. And something worse, something that looked like triumph. Lyora woke to silk. The sensation was so foreign that for a long moment she simply lay still, her cheek pressed to a fabric softer than anything she had ever touched, and let herself believe she was still dreaming. Then it came back. All of it. The ball. The fall. His arms. That word. She sat up so fast, the room spun. It was enormous. The chamber alone was larger than the entire servants' quarters she shared with a dozen others. Moonlight poured through windows that ran floor to ceiling, draped in silver cloth, spilling across walls, painted with wolves running through midnight forests. The bed beneath her was an ocean of white linen and dark fur wide enough to sleep 10. You're awake. Lyora's head snapped toward the corner. A woman sat there in a high-backed chair. Old, but not frail silver hair coiled at the crown of her head. A weathered face full of sharp angles, and beneath them, something that might have been kindness. She wore the deep blue robes of a royal healer. Where am I? The king's tower. The woman rose, crossed to a crystal pitcher, and poured. I am Sylvine, His Majesty's own physician. You've slept the better part of a day and a night. A day and a night. The king. Drink first. Sylvine pressed the glass into her hands and folded her fingers around it. Then questions. The water was cold and clean, and Lyora had to fight herself not to gulp it down like an animal. Her stomach cramped around its own emptiness. Small sips, Sylvine said. Your body has forgotten how to be fed. We'll have to teach it again slowly. She lifted the lid from a tray on the bedside table, and there was broth and bread still warm from the oven. The king's very particular about your care. Very particular. The glass trembled in Lyora's hands. Why am I here? She said. Why did he say that I belonged to? The door opened, and she felt him before she saw him. That same prickling awareness from the ballroom, that sense of being pinned in place by something invisible. Then Renaud Duskmere stepped into the room, and every scrap of air left her lungs. He had traded his formal black for something simpler. Dark trousers, a white shirt open at the throat. And somehow that made it worse, because now she could see the man instead of the crown, and the man was no less dangerous than the king had been. "Leave us," he said. Sylvain bowed and went, and the door clicked shut behind her, soft as a lid settling on a box. "You should be eating." His eyes dropped to the untouched tray. "Sylvain will scold us both." "Why am I here?" The question burst out of her before she could dress it up in anything softer. She gripped the glass like an anchor. He came closer, each step slow, deliberate, careful, the way you approach something wounded that you don't want to send bolting. "You are here," he said, "because I brought you here." "Yes, I gathered that." Sharper than she meant. She was too tired to be careful. "What I don't understand is why. I'm no one. I'm a servant. Less than a servant, I'm the ward of a woman who would sing at my funeral. Why would the Alpha King of Caldris stand up in front of 500 people and claim, 'Do you not feel it?'" The question stopped her cold. Feel what? His jaw tightened, and under the frustration was something rawer, something he did not seem to want her to see. "When I caught you, when I held you, did you feel nothing at all?" Her mouth went dry, because she had felt something. The heat, the way her heart had gone wild in a way that fear alone could not explain. That strange, impossible pull toward him that even now hummed low beneath her skin, like a plucked string that would not stop ringing. "I don't know what you mean," she said. "You forget." His voice was very quiet. "I can smell a lie." Heat rushed into her face. "Then perhaps you should stop asking me questions you already know the answers to." And for one long moment, the Alpha King of Caldris simply looked at her. Then she would not have believed it if she hadn't seen it. The corner of his mouth twitched. "You have a sharp tongue," he said, "for someone in such a precarious position." Precarious. The word straightened her spine. "Is that what this is? Am I a prisoner? You are a guest. Guests can leave." "Then leave." He stepped back, gestured one open hand toward the door. "If that is truly what you want," he said, "I will not stop you. You may walk out of this chamber, out of this palace, and go straight back to your aunt's tender care. The door is there. No one will bar it." Leora froze. The offer hung in the air, real, genuine, and utterly impossible. Because she thought of Morwenna's cold fury, of the punishment that would be waiting for the girl who had humiliated her before the entire court, of the slow starvation that passed for her life in that house. She did not move, and his face changed, softened almost too small to see. He lowered himself into the chair Sylvain had left, bringing his terrible gold eyes down closer to her own. "I frightened you tonight," he said, low, almost gentle. "That was never what I wanted. You claimed me in front of 500 people." Her voice wavered, and she hated it for wavering. "What did you want?" He was quiet a long time. When he finally spoke, it was soft enough that she had to lean toward him to catch it. "Before I was born," he said, "a seer came to my father's court. She looked into the fire. I said that the Duskmere line would end with me, that the last of my blood would die alone and unmated unless I found the one the moon made for me before my 30th year. His eyes held hers, steady, unblinking. "I turned 30 at the last new moon, which leaves me 12 days until the winter solstice. 12 days before the prophecy closes its hand." The blood ran cold in her veins. "You think I'm—" "I don't think." He cut her off, and there was something fierce burning under the words now. "I know. The moment I caught you. The moment your scent filled my lungs. My wolf knew you. It has been waiting for you its entire life, and it recognized you before my mind could catch up." He leaned in, and the heat of him rolled over her again. "You are my fated mate, Leora Ashvane, the one the moon made to stand beside me." The words should have been the most beautiful thing anyone had ever said to her. Instead, they filled her with a cold that had nothing to do with hunger. "That's not possible," she whispered. "I'm not even a wolf." Something moved across his face that she could not read. "No," he agreed softly. "You're something far more interesting than that." And before she could demand what in the moon's name that meant, the chamber door burst open, and a guard rushed in breathless. "Your Majesty, forgive me. Lady Morwenna has gone to the council. She's demanding the girl be returned to her custody. Tonight." The king's eyes never left Leora's face, but his voice when it came was cold enough to frost the glass. "Let her try." The council chamber sat deep in the eastern wing of the palace, a circle of black marble threaded with silver, so that in the candlelight the walls themselves seemed to breathe. 7 high chairs curved around a crescent table, 7 pack leaders, the advisors to the crown. And in the center of it all stood Leora, feeling exactly like a lamb dropped into a ring of wolves, which she supposed was precisely what she was. "This is highly irregular." Lord Castor Greaves Alpha of the Northern Pack leaned forward with his lip already curled. "You cannot simply claim a human at the mating ball, Your Majesty. The law is clear." "The law," Renaud said from the head of the table without heat, "states that a king may extend his protection to any citizen of Caldris facing unjust cruelty. This woman was starved nearly to the grave by the very guardian sworn to keep her. I am exercising my prerogative. Prerogative does not stretch to declaring a human your property. My niece is a troubled girl." Morwenna spoke from the petitioner's stand, her voice smooth and sorrowful, her eyes anything but. "Prone to fits, prone to invention. This whole display. She weighs less than a child of 12. Renaud's words fell flat and hard across the table. I could count her ribs through the cloth of her dress. A ripple of unease moved around the circle. Leora kept her eyes on the floor. Shame burned up her neck and into her cheeks because it was one thing to be starved and quite another to have it announced to a room full of strangers. "Even if the aunt's care was lacking," said another voice, a woman with copper hair and cool, calculating eyes. "The king's solution raises far stranger questions. You name this girl your fated mate, Your Majesty, and yet she bears no mark, carries no scent of wolf at all. How is such a thing even possible? That is not the council's concern. It is entirely the council's concern." Greaves's mouth twisted. "You would have us accept a human queen." The Duskmere line thinned with careful. The single word sliced the room in half. Renaud had not raised his voice. He did not need to. "You speak of your future queen," he said. "Choose the next word from your mouth with great care." The silence that followed had teeth in it, and into that silence a voice spoke that Leora did not at first recognize as her own. "I refuse." Every head at the table turned toward her. Her face flamed. Her hand shook, but she lifted her chin because she had spent her whole life being spoken osut over around a problem to be managed, a burden to be shifted. A thing and something in her had simply finally had enough. "Whatever the king believes about fate," she said, "or moons or mates, I have agreed to none of it. You sit here deciding my life as though I were a chair to be moved from one room to another. as though I have no voice in what happens to me. She swallowed. I do, and I am using it. Lord Greaves's eyes glittered with cruel amusement. Well, the little mouse has a voice after all. Should he speak sense? Morwenna said quickly, seizing the crack in the room like a hand seizing a rope. The child is overwhelmed. She needs familiar walls around her. Her own bed. Let me take her home. No. Renaud rose. The movement was slow, controlled, and yet every wolf in that room went tense as a drawn bowstring. The girl has made her objection heard, he said, coming around the table toward her. And she is right. She has not agreed to be my queen. That is her right, and I will defend it. He stopped directly in front of her, so close she could feel the warmth coming off him. But hear my one question first, Lyora Ashvane. Do you wish to go back to your aunt's house? It was a trap. She could see the shape of it clear as glass. Say no, and she stayed inside his power. Say yes, and she walked back into slow starvation and certain punishment. So she gave him neither. I wish him, she said carefully, to make my own choices. About my own life. That is all I have ever wanted. And something that might almost have been respect moved across the king's face. Then I offer this, he said, turning to the council, though his body stayed angled toward her. Lyora Ashvane remains at this palace as a guest of the crown, freely. She may come and go as she pleases, want for nothing, and be held to nothing. And if when this is over, she wishes to leave, she leaves with a settlement enough to keep her in comfort the rest of her days, and safe passage to any corner of the world she names. Greaves scowled. And the prophecy? The solstice is in 12 days, your majesty. You would gamble your whole bloodline on a servant girl's whim. Renaud's gaze came back to Lyora, and held. Then I suppose, he said quietly, I had better be persuasive. The council dissolved into argument. Lyora barely heard a word of it, because all she could hear was the sound of a blade hanging over her head. 12 days. 12 days to decide the fate of a king. 12 days. The strange thing. The thing she had no framework for, no memory to compare it against, was how quickly the palace stopped feeling like a cage and started feeling like something worse. Like a home she was afraid to want. The first day she waited for the trap to close. It didn't. The second day she waited for the freedom to be revealed as a lie. It wasn't. She wandered the gardens when she pleased. She found the great library, 3 floors of it, ladders on wheels, dust and gold, and the smell of old paper. And no one stopped her. No one questioned her. No one told her that girls like her had no business among books. She ate meals so rich they brought tears to her eyes, and had to be reminded by Sylvine over and over, small sips, small bites your body has to remember. And the servants who had once looked straight through her, now dipped their heads when she passed, and called her my lady. And it was the strangest, most uncomfortable thing in the world. Because she knew exactly what it was, to be one of them. And she could see in the flicker behind their careful eyes that some of them hated her for climbing out of a place they were still trapped in. She understood that, too. She would probably have hated her from the other side of it. But it was the king who confused her most of all. Because he did not push. He did not demand. He did not use the enormous, obvious power he held over her to bend her a single inch. Instead, he simply appeared. In the library when she was reading. In the garden among the pale blossoms that opened only at night, the ones the gardeners called moonflowers. At the supper table, where he would sit across from her and ask of all things questions. About her childhood. About what she liked. About her dreams, as though a servant girl were permitted to have any. "You're trying to seduce me," she accused him on the third morning when she opened her door and found him leaning against the far wall with a plate of warm pastries, as though kings did this sort of thing all the time. "I'm trying to know you," he corrected. "There's a difference." "Is there?" Those impossible gold eyes crinkled at the corners. "I am a king, Leora. If I wanted to seduce you, I would simply command it." "You can't command desire." "No." He pushed off the wall, came closer, and there it was again, that pull, that quiet, impossible gravity dragging her toward him. "That," he said, "is exactly why I have never tried." And he left her standing in her own doorway, with warm pastries in her hands, and heat blooming up her throat, and the maddening, unwelcome discovery that she was smiling. She stopped smiling the moment he was out of sight. But she had been, and she knew it, and so did he. Which was the problem, really. All of it was the problem. Because each night alone in that enormous bed that could have slept 10, Leora lay awake and took a careful, frightened inventory of the changes rising inside her. He had been right. She was starting to feel the bond. It began as almost nothing. A flutter of warmth when she knew he was near before she saw him, before she heard a single footstep. A twist of unease in her own stomach when something had troubled his day, though he was 3 floors and 100 rooms away. By the third night, she found she could close her eyes and simply know where he was in the palace. Point to him through stone and distance, following an invisible thread that ran from somewhere behind her ribs to somewhere behind his. It should have terrified her. The truly terrifying thing was that it didn't. It felt moon her, like coming home to a house she had never lived in. "You're not eating." Sylvine's voice pulled her out of her thoughts. The healer had taken to visiting each evening on the excuse of checking her recovery, though Leora had long since guessed the truth that the king had asked her to watch, to listen, to catch the first sign of any hurt before it could take root. "I'm not hungry tonight," Leora admitted. Sylvine studied her with eyes that missed nothing. "Your body is changing, adapting. It needs fuel now, more than ever, even when your mind can't feel the want of it." "Changing." Leora set down her fork. "What do you mean, changing?" The healer hesitated, and in that hesitation, Leora heard the sound of another door. She wasn't meant to open, swinging quietly on its hinge. "Has the king spoken to you?" Sylvine asked carefully. "About what you are?" "He said I was interesting." Leora's jaw tightened at the memory of it. "He never said more." No one here ever says more. Everyone in this palace seems to know something about me that I'm not allowed to know myself. And I am so tired of the dark." Sylvine was silent for a long moment. Then she sighed and set down the tray and lowered herself into the chair by the bed like a woman preparing to lift something heavy. "When you collapsed at the ball," she said, "I examined you thoroughly, and your body shows no trace of wolf. None. No quickened senses, no swift healing, nothing that could shift beneath your skin. Then how can I be his mate?" That said Sylvine, is the question, isn't it? She reached out, and after a moment's hesitation laid her weathered hand over Leora's. "There is a power in you, child. I felt it the moment I put my hands on you. Something deep, something sleeping, something that has been bound." Her old eyes were troubled. "Locked away, I think, when you were still very small. And the bond you're forming with the king every day you spend near him, it presses against those locks. Whatever was sealed inside you is beginning to wake." The cold went all the way through Leora's bones. Because she was thinking of a thing Rena had said to her weeks ago now, in a low and careful voice. She doesn't just resent you. She's afraid of you." "Bound by whom?" Lyora whispered. "That I cannot say." "What happens when it wakes all the way?" And Sylvain, who had answers for everything, who had spent 40 years at the shoulder of kings, shook her head slowly. "I don't know," she said. "No one does. Whatever you are, Leora Ashvane, it has not walked this world in a very long time." That night, Lyora dreamed. She stood in a forest of silver trees, their bark gleaming like moonlight poured into a mold and left to set. And at the end of the path, waiting, was a wolf. Enormous, black as the space between stars, with eyes of burning gold. She knew him. Of course she knew him. She would have known him anywhere. Renaud. He came to her slowly, his great head lowered, and pressed the broad plane of his muzzle into the palm of her hand. And the touch sent fire racing up her arm and straight into her chest. "Mine." His voice in her mind without a mouth to make it. "Finally. Mine. I don't understand what's happening to me," she told him, "in the way you can speak whole truths in dreams without ever moving your lips." "You're waking up," the wolf said. "What was stolen from you is coming home." What was stolen? But the dream was already cracking apart at the edges, and Lyora gasped awake to find him in her room. Not the wolf. The man. Renaud stood rigid at the foot of her bed, his chest rising and falling too fast, his gold eyes wide and stunned in the moonlight. "You were in my dream," he breathed. "You should not be able to do that. Not yet. Not for years." Lyora scrambled upright, heart hammering against her ribs. You can't come into my room in the middle of the—" "I didn't come. I was already here." He looked down at himself as though his own body had betrayed him. "I fell asleep in my own chambers, Leora, on the far side of the tower, and my body, walked here while I slept. The bond pulled me. I didn't choose a single step." She stared at him. In the silver light from the tall windows, she could see that he wore only loose sleep trousers, his chest bare, his feet bare against the cold stone. He truly had walked here from another wing of the palace, unconscious, unknowing, dragged by whatever impossible thing had strung itself between them. "This can't keep happening," she whispered. "No." He took a step toward her, and she found to her horror, to her wonder, that she could not make herself retreat. "It can't. It can only get worse. Or deeper. I no longer know which word is the true one." "Renaud." "Say it again." His voice had dropped rough and low and unguarded. "My name. Just say it again." "Renaud." He shut his eyes as though the word had struck him. And when he opened them, the gold had swallowed the last of the black, and he was looking at her like a man. 3 days lost in the desert. Looks at water. "I am trying," he said, and the words came out ragged, "to give you time. To let this be a thing you choose, and not a thing that is done to you. But the bond, my wolf, it is stronger than I am. Every hour it is stronger than I am." She could see the tremor running through him, the visible physical labor of his restraint. His hands were fisted at his sides so hard the knuckles had gone white. And Leora, who had every reason in the world to be afraid, who had spent her whole life learning to fear the strength of others, felt her heart do the most dangerous thing it had ever done. It softened. "Then perhaps," said a dry voice from the doorway, "the king might continue this conversation in the morning." Sylvain stood at the threshold in her night robe, one eyebrow raised, entirely unimpressed by the sight of the most powerful man in the kingdom, standing barefoot and undone at the foot of a servant girl's bed. Two flustered guards hovered behind her. "The lady," Sylvain went on, "has had a very long few days." Renaud drew a breath, gathered himself piece by visible piece back into the shape of a king. He nodded stiffly and turned to go, but at the door he stopped. Leora. She looked up. "The bond between fated mates," he said quietly. "It runs in both directions. You should know that." His gold eyes found hers across the dark room and held. "In time you will feel me the way I already feel you. My moods, my fears." He paused, and something flickered behind his face there, and gone dangerous as a struck match. "My hunger." Then he was gone, and the door closed, and Leora sat alone in the tangle of her sheets, with her heart slamming, and her breath short, and something stirring deep in her chest in a place she had never once in her life had reason to notice. Something that had heard the call of his wolf, and wanted desperately, terribly to answer it. Rena came the next morning, before the sun had fully cleared the mountains, slipping through the door with a basket of laundry as her excuse, and her whole round face bright with the fever of gossip. "Is it true?" she demanded, before the door was even shut. "The whole quarter is on fire with it. They're saying he sleepwalked halfway across the tower to your room. Barefoot, half-dressed, like a moonstruck boy." "Rena, Leora." Her friend set the basket down, and took both her hands, and her voice, when it came, had lost every trace of its earlier delight. "Have you ever wondered why your aunt hates you the way she does?" The question caught Leora sideways. "Because I'm a burden. Because my parents died, and left me on her doorstep, and she never wanted—" "No." Rena sat down on the edge of the great bed, and pulled Leora down beside her, and dropped her voice to almost nothing. "I've served in that house 6 years now, and I'm telling you it isn't hate. Or it isn't only hate. I've watched her watch you, Leora, when she thinks no one's looking. And it isn't a woman looking at a burden." A chill walked slowly up Leora's spine. "Then what is it?" Rena's eyes were steady and frightened all at once. "It's a woman," she said, "waiting for something. Watching a pot she's afraid is going to boil over. She doesn't resent you." She squeezed Leora's hands. "She's afraid of you. And I've never once in 6 years been able to understand why a grown wolf of a woman would be afraid of a half-starved girl who wasn't even allowed to raise her voice." The words settled over Leora like frost over a window. "She doesn't resent you. She's afraid of you." And now hear from a different mouth the very same thing. "Rena," she said slowly, "when we were girls in that house, did you ever hear my aunt speak of my mother?" Rena went very still. "Once," she said. "Only once. I wasn't meant to hear it. She was deep in her cups, and she said—" Rena swallowed. "She said your mother had ruined everything. That she'd made a thing that never should have been made. And that she'd die before she let it happen twice." The room seemed to tilt. "A thing that never should have been made." Leora rose, crossed to the tall windows on legs that did not feel entirely her own, and looked out over the sleeping gardens where the last of the night's moonflowers were folding their pale petals, closed against the coming dawn. Somewhere in this palace, a king was waiting for her to choose him. Somewhere out in the world, an aunt was waiting for something to boil over. And somewhere inside her own, chest-bound, locked sleeping, but no longer silent, something ancient had begun very quietly to stir. She pressed her hand flat against the cold glass, and for just a moment she would tell herself afterward that she had imagined it, that it was only the first light of morning, catching the frost. The place where her palm met the window seemed to glow. A soft, silver light, there, and gone. Leora Ashvane stared at her own hand, and understood with the slow, cold certainty of someone watching a wave rise far out at sea, that whatever was coming for her, whatever she was, the days ahead were going to change everything, every single thing, and there would be no going back to being no one ever again. By the 6th day, Leora had stopped waiting for the palace to turn on her, which was, she would think later, exactly the mistake it wanted her to make. The bond had become a living thing between them, not a whisper anymore. A rope, a chain, an anchor sunk deep into the soft floor of her chest, and every hour of every day it pulled a little tighter, drew her a little closer, until she could no longer tell where her own heart ended and the pull of his began. She hated it. She hated how much she didn't hate it, because that was the trap inside the trap, wasn't it? Not the palace, not the guards, not the days ticking down like water dripping from a cracked bowl. The trap was this, that she was starting to want him, and she could not for the life of her tell whether the wanting was hers, or whether it belonged to the thread the moon had strung between them, without either of them being asked. "How do I know?" she said to Sylvain one evening, low staring into a cup of broth she hadn't touched, "that any of it is real? How do I know I'm not just feeling what the bond tells me to feel? A puppet that thinks the strings are its own arms." Sylvain was quiet for a long moment. "You don't," she said, finally. "Not yet. That is the cruelty of it, and I won't insult you by pretending otherwise. The bond opens a door, child. But no bond in the history of the world has ever walked a soul through it." She set down her needlework. "What you do once the door is open, that has always been yours. Only yours." It should have comforted her. It didn't, because it meant the choice was real, and a real choice can be made wrongly, and Leora had spent her whole life without a single choice to her name, and now she had the largest one imaginable, and no idea in the world how to make it. So she did what she always did when her mind grew too loud. She went to the library, and that was where Sylvain found her 3 hours later, and that was where everything began quietly to come apart. The healer did not come with tea. She came with a book, old, cracked leather, the gilt worn off the spine by generations of hands. She set it on the table in front of Leora without a word, and opened it to a page she had clearly already found and stepped back. Leora looked down. It was an illustration. A woman standing in a clearing of silver trees, her arms lifted and pouring off her skin in every direction light. Pure white, blinding light, drawn in flaking silver ink that still after who knew how many years seemed almost to shine. Beneath it, a single word in a language Leora didn't know, and beneath that, in the common tongue, a translation. Luminary. "I have spent 40 years in the service of this crown," Sylvain said quietly, "and in all that time I have read every book in this library at least once. This one I have read 100 times, because it frightened me, and I'd never say why." She reached out and touched the illustrated woman's face with one careful finger. "Until the night I put my hands on you, and felt the same thing I feel standing near a storm before the first lightning." Leora could not look away from the light on the page. "A luminary," Sylvain said, "is not a wolf. It is not human. It is older than either. The books say the moon herself in the first age of the world wept for how alone her children were, in the dark, and where her tears fell, luminaries were born. Beings of pure moonlight made flesh, made to walk among the packs and heal what could not be healed, to light what had gone dark. Her voice dropped. There has not been one in this world for 1,000 years, Lyora. They were hunted to the last, because a creature that can pour light into a dying body can pour darkness into a living one, Lyora finished. She didn't know how she knew it. She simply knew, the way you know your own name. Sylvine's eyes met hers. Yes, my mother. Lyora's voice had gone strange and far away. You're telling me my mother was. I'm telling you that whatever bound the power inside you was not the work of an enemy. Sylvine lowered herself into the chair across the table, slow, as though her bones had suddenly aged. A binding of that strength on a child that young, it would take everything the caster had. Do you understand me? Whoever locked your light away did not do it to imprison you. They did it to hide you. They burned their own soul to the wick to make you look to every hunting eye in the world like nobody at all. And there it was. The lie she had believed about herself her whole life. Nobody, nothing empty, turned inside out in a single breath and revealed to have been all along a gift, a shield. Someone had loved her enough to make her invisible. And Lyora, who had not wept in front of another living soul since she was a small child, put both her hands over her face and wept. The second blow came 2 nights later, and it came on horseback in the dark, screaming. The rider reached the palace gates a little after midnight. A young wolf from the eastern border, his horse foundered and foaming his voice gone to shreds. Lyora heard the commotion from her window before she understood a word of it. Heard the gates groan open. Heard boots on stone. Heard rising up through the whole waking tower, a single word passed mouth to mouth like a coal too hot to hold. Hollow. She was on the stairs before she knew she'd risen. Wrapped in a blanket barefoot, following the pull of the bond, straight to Renault, the way a needle follows north, and she found him in the war room bent over a map, his face carved from something harder than she had ever seen in it. He looked up when she entered, and for one breath before he could hide it, she saw what was underneath the king. Dread. You should be sleeping, he said. You're afraid. I felt it wake me. Flat. Certain. What's happened? He held her eyes a long moment. Then he stepped back from the map and let her see. 3 villages, marked in red, all along the eastern border. Slaughtered, he said. In the night. Every soul. Old ones. Children. His jaw worked. Not by wolves. Not by any raider or rival pack. By something we haven't seen in a very long time. The Hollow Ones. She didn't know why she said it. The name had risen in her throat, unbidden cold as a stone dropped down a well. Renault went very still. How do you know that name? I don't know how I know it. Her hand had drifted without her permission to the base of her own throat. I just do. The way I knew what a luminary was before Sylvain finished the word. It's like there's a room in my own head I've never been allowed into, and lately I keep hearing things through the door. He did not look surprised. He looked like a man watching a piece he had dreaded finally drop into place. A hollow one, he said low, is a wolf that has had its soul torn out, not killed, emptied. There is a ritual ancient, forbidden, unspeakable, that rips the spirit from a living wolf and leaves behind only the hunger, only the body. Walking, feeding on the life it can no longer make for itself. He looked back down at the 3 red marks. They are very hard to make. It takes enormous power to hollow even one, to make enough of them to burn 3 villages. He stopped, and Leora watched him, not want to finish the sentence. Renaud, quiet. Why are you telling me this instead of sending me back to bed? He was silent. So she looked at the map herself, and that was when she saw it. 3 villages. She had thought them scattered, random, 3 cruel accidents of geography. But they weren't scattered at all. She followed them with her eyes, the first, the second, the third, and understood with a horror that started in her stomach and climbed hand over hand up her spine that they lay in a line. A straight line. An arrow drawn in blood and ash across the eastern half of the kingdom. And she did not have to trace it very far to see where it was pointing. Here, at the palace. At the tower. At the window where a servant girl had stood 2 nights ago and watched her own hand glow. At her. They're not raiding, she whispered. They're walking. Toward me. Yes. His voice was barely a breath. Someone is driving them. Someone who knows exactly what you are. Someone who has known. His hand rose, hovered, and then very gently cupped the side of her face, his thumb tracing her cheekbone with a tenderness that made the horror somehow worse. Far longer than a handful of days, Leora. Someone has always known. She should have pulled away. She stepped into him instead, pressed her forehead to his chest, and felt his arms close around her, and let herself for exactly 3 heartbeats be held by the only thing in the world that felt like it was on her side. 3 heartbeats. That was all the moon allowed her. Because on the 4th, the war room doors crashed open, and Lord Castor Greaves came striding through them with a scroll in his hand, and triumph all over his face, and Lady Morwenna at his shoulder, like a shadow that had learned to smile. Your Majesty. Greaves's voice dripped with satisfaction. We have completed our investigation into the border attacks, and I regret to inform the Crown that the trail of destruction leads to one place only. His eyes slid to Leora, cold and glad. Here, to this palace. More precisely. The smile widened to her. That is absurd, Renaud growled, and stepped in front of her, a wall of muscle and fury between Leora and the door. Is it? Morwenna's composure was cracking now at last, and through the crack came something Leora had felt her whole childhood, but had never once been permitted to see so plainly. Old, patient, bottomless hate. My niece has drawn death behind her like a train her entire life. First her parents, now 3 villages full of the innocent. Death follows her, Your Majesty. It always has. I tried to warn you. My parents died in an accident. Leora heard her own voice shaking. A carriage. On the North Road. You told me. You told me 100 times. Did I? And Morwenna smiled. Slow. Terrible. A smile 15 years in the making. Is that truly what you believe, child? The room went silent. Leora felt the blood drop out of her face. What are you saying? I'm saying, said her aunt, savoring each word like the last course of a long-awaited meal, that your mother and father did not die on any road. They were taken into the courtyard of this very palace, and they were executed by order of the old Alpha King himself, 15 years ago this winter. No, barely a whisper. That's a lie. Renaud tell her. But Renaud had gone rigid, and when Leora turned to look at him, She saw that his face had drained to ash, and that his eyes were fixed on nothing, and that somewhere behind them, a memory long buried was clawing its way up into the light. He hadn't known, but some part of him, some boy who had lived in this palace 15 winters ago, had felt it happen. "To your father." Morwenna went on relentless, now all the mask fallen away. "Was a scholar. A clever, curious, foolish man who went digging where wiser men leave the earth unturned, and your mother." She paused, and her lip curled. "Your mother was the thing he dug up. A luminary, the last of her cursed kind, hidden all those years in plain sight, until he loved her, until he married her, until Moon help us all, the two of them, made you." "Enough." Renault's voice cracked like a whip. "The people have a right to know what you have brought inside these walls." Greaves's voice out across the war room. "What you have claimed as your mate. She is the daughter of an abomination, your majesty. A creature of pure moonlight the Pax spent 1,000 years scrubbing from the world. Her very existence is a wound in the natural order, and you would set her on the Iron Throne. Luminary. Abomination." The words struck against each other in Leora's chest like two bells, and out of the space between them rose something she had never felt before, in all her life. Not shame. Anger. Bright and clean, and hers. Her power was bound at her mother's death. Morwenna's voice had dropped to something almost reverent, almost hungry. By a dying woman who poured her whole soul into a lock that would keep the child hidden until she came of age. But locks fail, your majesty, and this one is failing now. Every day she spends beside you, every hour of that bond you're so proud of, it feeds her waking, feeds it, and when she opens all the way, Morwenna's eyes shone, she will be magnificent. She will be a sun with a heartbeat. She will be exactly what she was born to be. Renault's voice cut through the poison like a blade through smoke. He turned, and he did not look at the council or at Greaves or at the aunt who had starved and lied and buried the truth of a murdered mother for 15 years. He looked at Leora, and in his eyes there was no fear. No hesitation, no flinch, no calculation, no weighing of thrones and prophecies and what the Pax would say. There was only certainty, fierce and total and warm. "I don't care what you are," he said, low. For her alone, though, the whole room heard it in the silence. "I have never cared. I don't care what they call you, or what your mother was, or what price the world has decided your blood is worth." He stepped close and took her face in both his hands and put his forehead against hers so that she could feel the words as much as hear them. "You are Leora. That is the whole of it. That has always been the whole of it. And it is enough. You are enough. You were enough before any of them ever looked at you, and you'll be enough long after they've all looked away." And Leora, who had waited her entire life to hear one single soul say those exact words to her, broke not into pieces, into light. She felt it happen. A crack deep in the sealed room she'd never been allowed into. A hairline fracture running through the lock. Her dying mother had spent her soul to forge. Through it, faint but unmistakable, a thin silver glow began to leak out into the space behind her ribs. Not enough to blind anyone. Not yet. But enough that Renault, his forehead still against hers, felt it, and drew back, and looked at her as though the sun were rising in a place he'd long ago stopped hoping to see it. "There you are," he breathed. And in the doorway, Lady Morwenna's smile did not falter for even a moment, because that Leora would understand far too late had been the entire point. They did not speak of thrones again that night. They did not speak of counsel or prophecy, or the villages of the dead. Renaud walked her back to her chambers himself, and at the door, he did not try to follow her in, and she found to her own bewildered dismay that she almost wished he would. Because the thing about being told at last that you are enough is that some traitor, part of you immediately wants more. "How long?" she said at her door, not looking at him. "Until the solstice. How long is left?" 3 days. His voice was rough. 3 days, and it comes for you whether we are ready or not. 3 days. She turned to face him, and there in the torchlight she saw the whole of it in his face, the want he was holding back, the fear he was carrying, the crown that would end if she chose to walk away, and the fact that he had told her tonight in front of everyone that she could still walk away, that it was still hers to choose, that he had not taken it from her even when taking it would have saved his entire bloodline, which was, she realized, the most romantic thing anyone had ever done for her, and the most infuriating, because it meant she couldn't even resent him into leaving. He had left her nothing to push against except her own galloping, terrified, treacherous heart. "Renaud. Leora. If I kissed you right now," she heard herself say, and where in the moon's name had that come from she had not decided to say, that her mouth had simply gone ahead without her. "Would you know if it was me or the bond?" He went very still. "No," he said honestly. "I wouldn't, and neither would you. Not yet." "Then how?" "You wait." He said it gently, but there was steel under it, the same steel that had bound 7 packs into a crown. "You wait until the bond has finished settling, and you can hear your own heart again underneath it. And then, if you still want to," his gold eyes burned, "you come and find me, and I will still be here. That I can promise you. I will always still be here." And he lifted her hand and pressed his lips to her knuckles, once formal as a courtier and undone as a boy, and turned and walked away down the long torch-lit hall. Leora watched him go, and then she went inside and closed the door and leaned her back against it and slid slowly down to the floor and pressed her glowing hands to her face and thought with real and mounting panic, oh no. Oh no. Because she wasn't waiting to find out if it was real. She already knew. She just wasn't ready yet to be a woman who knew it. The next day, Renaud told her the last of it. He found her in the garden among the moonflowers in the thin gray light of a winter afternoon, and he did not soften it, because he had learned in the short time he had known her that she despised being softened. "When the solstice comes," he said, "the lock breaks all the way, and the power that floods up through you will be more than any living body was ever built to hold. It will burn you out from the inside, Leora, unless you have an anchor. Something strong enough to hold you to this world when the light tries to carry you out of it." "What kind of anchor?" He was quiet for a long moment. "A completed bond," he said. "A mate mark. It ties 2 souls into one weave. 2 anchors instead of 1. It is the only thing I know of strong enough to hold a luminary through her waking." He looked away, out over the pale blossoms. "I have been trying not to say this to you, because I swore I would never take the choice from you. And this feels like the moon herself putting a knife to your throat and calling it a choice." Leora sat with it. 3 days. A power that would kill her. A mark that might save her. A king who loved her enough to tell her the truth, even when the truth cost him everything he wanted. "You could have lied," she said slowly. "You could have told me the mark was the only way to be safe, and I might have believed you, and you'd have your bond and your bloodline and your throne. Why didn't you?" He looked at her, then, and there was something almost like anger in it. Not at her, but at the whole cruel shape of the thing. "Because a bond built on a lie is not a bond," he said. "It's a cage with better manners. And you have lived your whole life in cages. Lyora Ashvane. I would sooner lose the throne, the bloodline, and every day the moon still owes me, than be one more set of bars around you." And Lyora, who had spent her whole life being wanted for what she could give, for the work of her hands, for the space she was told not to take up, felt something come loose in her chest that had been knotted so long she'd stopped feeling it at all. "There's still something you're not telling me," she said. "Isn't there? About who's doing this? Who hollowed those villages? Who's been watching me my whole life? Who was afraid of me before I ever glowed?" Renaud did not answer. "I didn't have to. It was already coming for them, patient and certain, counting down the hours to the longest night of the year. The solstice came in cold and clear, the moon swollen and low, and Lyora felt it in her bones, the way you feel a storm before the first crack of thunder. She did not sleep. She sat by the window instead, the way she always did now, watching the moonflowers open their pale faces to the dark. And somewhere past midnight, she felt it. A wrongness. It came in through the bond. First a spike of alarm from Renaud, somewhere below her in the tower, sharp enough to bring her to her feet. And then it came in through the new senses. Her cracking lock had loosed the ones that heard heartbeats through stone and smelled fear on the air like smoke. Except this was the absence of a heartbeat. A cold place. An empty place. A hole in the fabric of the living world, moving slow and patient and hungry through the halls below. And then another. And another. And another. Lyora's blood turned to ice in her veins. They were inside the walls. She was out the door before she'd decided to move, running barefoot down the great stair, following the bond and the cold. Both, and she rounded the last landing and nearly collided with Renaud, coming up, sword already in his hand, guards already pouring from the shadows behind him. "Get back to your room," he snarled. "Bar the door. Now." "They're in the eastern wing." The words tore out of her because she could feel them, to feel exactly where they were, and the eastern wing meant the servants' quarters. "Renaud, that's where they sleep. That's where She didn't finish. She was already running. "Lyora." His roar chased her down the corridor. "Lyora." But she was faster than she had ever been in her life. Faster than a starving girl should be able to move. The new thing inside her sang in her blood as she ran, and the silver leaked brighter from her skin, with every step lighting the dark halls ahead of her. And she followed the cold and the fear straight into the eastern wing and skidded to a stop in the doorway of the servants' hall. They were there, 6 of them, maybe more. Shapes that flickered sickeningly between wolf and shadow bodies that were still technically alive, and eyes that held nothing at all. No soul, no spark, just a bottomless patient hunger turning now all at once toward the girl glowing silver in the doorway. And in the center of the room, backed against the cold hearth, clutching a fire iron in both shaking hands, stood Rena. Small, round-faced, fierce as a terrier, and utterly hopelessly outmatched. Her eyes found Lyora's across the room. "Run," Rena whispered. Lyora did not run. The thing that had slept in her for 15 years. the thing her mother had died to hide, the thing that had heard a king say, "You are enough," and cracked its lock at the sound that thing rose up in her chest like a tide. And Leora Ashvane, who had spent her whole life being told to make herself smaller, lifted one glowing hand, and for the first time in her life did the opposite. The light did not blind her. It answered her. It poured from her palm across the dark hall. Not a weapon, not yet, she didn't know how to make it a weapon, but a wall. A curtain of pure moonlight dropping between the Hollow Ones and her only friend in the world. The Hollow Ones shrieked, recoiled, threw up their flickering arms against the glow as though it burned. And in the ringing silver-lit chaos, Leora heard herself say, in a voice that did not entirely sound like her own, "You will not touch her." The same words the king had said that first night in a ballroom over her fallen body. She understood in that moment exactly what he had felt. And then Renaud was there, and his guards were there, blades flashing, and the room dissolved into a fury of steel and shadow and light. Leora held her wall, held it with everything she had, sweat pouring down her face, her whole body shaking with the effort of channeling a power she had no idea how to hold, until the last Hollow One fell, and the light guttered out of her all at once, and she dropped to her knees on the cold stone, spent, gasping. Rena reached her first, threw both arms around her. "You glowed," she sobbed into Leora's hair. "You glowed, you mad brilliant girl, you glowed." And Renaud knelt on her other side, his hands on her face, checking her, holding her, his voice wrecked. "You could have died. You ran toward them. You could have—" "She's my friend," Leora said simply, as though that explained everything. Because to her, it did. But the night was not done with them. Because that was the moment the great doors at the far end of the hall swung open unhurried on their heavy hinges, and a figure stepped through, alone, unguarded, walking into a room full of the king's armed men, as though she owned every stone of it. Lady Morwenna. Except she was not cowering now. Not smooth, not simpering, not hiding behind the mask of the put-upon guardian. She stood tall in the doorway, and the torchlight did something wrong to her. Shadow stretched it too long and too dark across the floor, and her eyes. Her eyes were pits, wells, two holes bored straight through the world into somewhere lightless and old. "Oh, don't stop the tender reunion on my account," she said, and her voice had changed, deepened, layered as though something else were speaking through her, using her mouth. "I've waited 15 years for this night. I'd hate to arrive late to my own ending." Every guard in the room raised his blade. Renaud rose slowly and put himself once again between Leora and the thing in the doorway. "You," he said. "It was you. The whole time. The villages. The Hollow Ones. All of it. Of course it was me." Morwenna smiled, and it stretched too wide across her powdered face, wider than any human smile had a right to go. "Who else, Your Majesty? Who else loved her enough to keep her? To watch her all these long years ripening on the vine like the sweetest fruit in the world?" Her black eyes slid past the king and found Leora, and fixed on her with a hunger that made every Hollow One in that room look tame. "I didn't harvest 3 villages of souls for sport, little niece. I harvested them for you. An army 15 years in the making. All of it patiently, quietly waiting for one single night." "This night," Leora breathed. "This night." Morwenna spread her arms, and the shadows spread with them, pouring off her like ink into water, filling the corners of the hall. "The solstice. When that lock your mother died to forge finally shatters, and all that beautiful ancient power comes flooding up into the world through you." Her voice dropped to a whisper that somehow filled the entire room. "I am going to drink it. Every last drop." The shadows surged, and the last thing Lyora saw before the hall erupted into darkness and steel, and Renault's roaring, moonlit fury was her aunt's face. 15 years of hate. 15 years of patience. And underneath it, buried so deep that only Leora's new terrible luminary eyes could see it, a single faint flickering thread of silver light trapped inside all that darkness. Struggling, familiar, warm. But Leora did not yet understand what she was looking at. She had only this one night left to find out. The shadows broke against the guards like a black tide, and for one long, screaming minute, the great hall was nothing but chaos. Steel, darkness, the wet wrong sound of hollow things dying that had never truly been alive. Renault moved through it like a storm, given a body, his blades carving silver arcs, and Lyora stood frozen at the center of it all, her mind refusing, absolutely, refusing to close its hand around the thing she had just seen. A thread of silver inside her aunt, trapped, struggling, warm, familiar. But there was no time, because Morwenna's shadows were endless, and even a storm tires, and Lyora watched from across the ruined hall as 3 of them wrapped around Renault's sword arm and dragged him down to one knee. "Renault, go!" His voice tore across the room, cracking with strain. "Find Sylvine, the circle in the garden. Go, Leora. I won't leave you. You have to." And through the bond, under the fury, she felt what he would not let his face show. Terror. Not for himself. For her. "If she takes your light, everyone in this kingdom dies. Everyone. You are the only thing that matters now. Promise me you'll run." She did not promise. She did something worse, because the shadows were closing over him, swallowing him, and something in Leora's chest simply snapped. The last hairline crack in the lock her mother had died to forge gave way all at once, and every drop of light that had been building behind it for 15 years came roaring up into the world. She screamed, and the hall turned white. Not silver this time. White. Blinding. The pure raw light of a moon, with no dark side, pouring out of her skin, her eyes, her open mouth, flooding every corner of the room at once. The shadows recoiled, shrieking. Morwenna threw up an arm against the glare. And in the eye of it, for one impossible heartbeat, Renaud broke free, his golden gaze finding hers across the burning air, wide with wonder, with terror, with love. Then Morwenna's power slammed into Leora like a mountain falling. She hit the far wall. The light guttered. Cold hands seized her arms, dragging her toward the dark, and her aunt's voice crooned in her ear, close delighted, obscene. "There she is. There's my beautiful girl. Oh, let's see how you taste teeth, wrong and sharp and reaching for her throat." And then fire, not Leora's light. Gold and crimson, the fury of a wolf, pushed past every limit a body was built to hold. His war cry shook dust from the ancient stones as he tore through the last of the shadows, half-shifted into something monstrous and magnificent, and ripped Leora from her aunt's grasp and ran. The world blurred. Corridors, stairwells, a hidden door she'd never known was there. He moved with the speed of a man who has decided his own life is worth nothing, next to the weight in his arms. And Leora clung to him, and felt through the bond the wounds he was taking, The blood he was losing the price of every single step. "Don't let go," he gasped. "Whatever happens, don't let go of me." "Never," she breathed. They burst out into the night. The palace garden lay silver and still beneath the swollen solstice moon, the moonflowers glowing like 100 small held breaths. And in the center of it, inside a ring of ancient standing stones, stood Sylvine, her arms already raised, her old face lit from below by a pale power rising out of the earth itself. Inside the circle, her voice cracked like a whip. "Now. It's the only ground her darkness cannot reach." Renaud staggered the last few steps and collapsed with Leora at the circle's heart, and the ancient stones flared to life around them, throwing up a dome of trembling silver light. Beyond it, at the garden's edge, the shadows gathered. Waiting, patient, held back for now by a magic older than the crown. And in the sudden ringing quiet, Leora looked down at the man who had carried her here. And her heart stopped. Because Renaud was dying. She could see it. She could feel it through the bond, the great golden brightness of him, flickering, now guttering like a candle in a draught. His chest was a ruin. Deep wounds wept dark across the white of his shirt, more blood than any body could spare, and his golden eyes were already going soft and distant. "No." Her hands flew to his chest, pressing useless. "No, no, no, no. Sylvine. Sylvine, help me. He's—" "I cannot." The healer's voice was heavy as a grave. "His wounds are past my skill, child. Far past it. The only thing left in this world that could pull him back." She stopped. "Say it." A luminary's full power poured into him, all of it at once. Sylvine's eyes were wet. "But you have never been taught to hold it. You would open every gate at once, and the flood would not stop at healing him. It would take you too. It would burn you both to nothing." Leora looked down at Renaud's fading face. She had a choice. Let him die, and live, and fight another day with the whole of her light intact. Or pour everything she had into saving him, and very likely die with him in the trying. It was not a choice at all. "Leora, no." Sylvine's hand closed hard on her shoulder. "You don't understand what you're reaching for. Your mother was the last luminary who ever lived, and even she—" "My mother," Leora said, and her voice was steady now, steadier than it had ever been in her life, "gave everything she had to keep me alive." She pressed her palms flat against the wreck of Renaud's chest and felt the sluggish, failing flutter of his heart beneath them. "Now I'm going to use what she gave me to keep him. Tell me how to survive it. Tell me what you know." Sylvine stared at her a long, breaking moment. Then she knelt. "Your light answers to intention," she said, fast, low, urgent. "To love. It has no natural floor, no bottom. That is its gift and its horror both. If you open yourself to all of it, you must have an anchor. Something strong enough to hold you here, to this world, to your own body, when the light tries to lift you out of it." Her old hand gripped Leora's. "Find your anchor, child. Fix on it. And do not let go no matter what the light promises you." Leora closed her eyes and reached for it. It came like a dam breaking, like a sea that had been dammed behind a single door for 15 years, and now all at once remembered the shape of the ocean. Everything her mother had poured into her. Everything that had been sealed and hidden and denied. It surged up through her in a torrent of pure and terrible radiance, and Leora screamed as her body became a vessel for a power that had never been meant to fit inside anything mortal. Too much some small, drowning voice whispered from the back of her mind. It's too much, you'll come apart, you'll... She reached for her anchor. She reached for Renaud, for the bond, for the golden thread of him tethered to her soul, and she poured the flood into him. She watched through streaming eyes as his wounds began to close. Tissue knitting. The dark tide of blood, slowing, stopping, reversing. She felt his heart find its rhythm again beneath her hands, steady, then strong, then roaring back to full and furious life. She felt his brightness surge back through the bond, like a sun clearing the horizon. But the light did not stop. It had found the open gate, and it wanted out. All of it, all at once, more and more and more. Building past the healing, past the saving, past any purpose at all, toward a crescendo that had no end but her own unmaking. The standing stones began to crack. The ground shook. The dome flared white, then whiter, and Liora felt herself begin to dissolve at the edges, to thin, to scatter, to burn away into the thing she was made of, Liora. Renaud's voice, alive, awake, his hands closing around her wrists. Come back to me. Fix on me your anchor. Use me. Come back. And she tried. She grabbed for the golden thread of him with everything she had left. And it wasn't enough. Because the light was vast and the bond was new, and even Renaud's whole soul was not a heavy enough stone to hold a rising sun to the earth. She felt herself slipping past him, through him, up and out and away. And she understood with the last clear corner of her scattering mind that she was going to die. That she had chosen this. That she would burn out like her mother before her, giving everything, holding nothing back. And then a new light bloomed inside the flood. Small at first. A single thread of silver, unbearably familiar. Warm the way only one thing in the whole world had ever been warm. It reached up out of the torrent and wrapped itself around Liora's scattering soul and held. And a voice she had never in her waking life heard, and had somehow ached for every single day of it, spoke inside the light. My darling girl. Liora's eyes flew open. And there, inside the raging flood, a form was gathering. A woman made of light itself, silver from her hair to her feet, her face, Liora's own face, older, softer, worn, smooth, by a love so vast it had survived the grave. Mother, Liora breathed. Look at you. The woman's shining hands came up to frame Liora's face, and though they were made of nothing but light, Liora felt them. Warm, real, realer than anything. Look how strong you've grown. I don't know how to stop it. The light it's taking me. I can't hold. Then hear me, and say it back to me so I know you've heard. The flood raged on around them. The stones cracked. Renaud shouted her name from very far away. But inside the light, in the small, warm circle of her mother's arms, the whole roaring world went suddenly perfectly still. You were never empty, her mother said. Do you hear me? All those years they told you that you were nothing. A burden, a ghost. A thing that took up space, hadn't earned. They were wrong. Every one of them was wrong. You were never nothing, Liora. You were so full of light I had to give my whole life to hide it, or the world would have torn you apart to have it. But I only mattered. Liora wept because of what I am, because of the power, because he chose me, because the moon chose me, because... No, the word was gentle, and it was iron. Listen to me. Because I have only this one moment, and I have waited 15 years for it. You did not become worth loving the night a king caught you in a ballroom. You were worth loving in your cradle, before your light ever woke, before anyone in this world knew what you were, or wanted a single thing from you. You were enough as a hungry child no one fed. You were enough as a servant no one saw. You are not enough because you are a luminary. You are not enough because he chose you. Her shining thumbs brushed the tears from Lyora's face. You are enough because you were born. That is all it has ever taken. That is all it takes for any soul that has ever lived. And no one, my darling, not an aunt, not a king, not the moon herself gets to be the one who decides that for you. And that was the turning. Not a sword, not a spell, not a king's command soared across a burning garden. Just a mother made of light telling her daughter the one true thing she had waited her whole starving life to hear. That she had been enough all along. That her worth had never once, not for a single breath, depended on being wanted by anyone at all. And it was that not the bond, not Renaud, not the golden thread. It was that which finally caught Leora as she scattered. That was the anchor. Not another soul holding her to the earth. Her own. The simple, unshakable, newborn knowledge that she was worth holding on to all by herself for no reason, but that she existed. The light contracted. It did not vanish. She could still feel it vast and terrible and beautiful, humming beneath her skin. But it was hers now, truly hers. A son she held instead of a son that held her. Lyora Ashvane opened her eyes, and they were full of silver, and she was still impossibly alive. "You came back," Renaud whispered. His hands were still around her wrists. His face was wet. "How did you—" "My mother," Leora said softly. "She held me, until I could hold myself." She looked past his shoulder, then toward the garden's edge where the shadows still boiled, and a thing that had once been her aunt still waited. And her silver eyes went cold. "She's still out there," Lyora said, rising to her feet. The power settled around her like a cloak of moonlight. "And she made a mistake." "What mistake?" Lyora looked toward the dark. "She thought that drinking my light would make her strong." Her eyes blazed. "She never once considered that my light might burn." The ancient stones crumbled as Lyora stepped beyond the circle. "Leora, wait," Renaud scrambled. "You can't face her alone." "I'm not alone." She turned, and her silver gaze softened just for him, just for a heartbeat. "I have you. I'll always have you now. But this—" She looked back toward the waiting dark. "This is mine to do." "If you die," he said roughly, "I follow. You know that." "Then I'd better not die." And she walked into the shadows. The hollow ones surrounded her at once, flickering hungry wrong. They should have terrified her. Instead, Leora felt only sorrow. "You were wolves once," she said softly. "You had names. You had souls. Someone loved you before she took that from you." The nearest one lunged. Light bloomed from her open palm, catching at mid-air not to destroy, but to release. It shrieked a sound of agony and unbearable relief tangled together and dissolved into a drift of pale motes that rose up gently into the night like freed breath. Like a spirit finally allowed to go home. "Rest now," Lyora whispered. She moved through the garden like mercy wearing the shape of a woman. Each hollow one met the same fate. Not death. Release. One by one, the stolen souls lifted free and floated up toward the moon. How impressive! Morwenna stepped from the last of the shadows. And she was barely a woman now at all. A twisting thing of living darkness, her powdered face cracked and falling away, her eyes two wells of absolute black. You've learned so quickly, little niece. I've learned enough. Liora did not stop walking. You murdered my mother and father. You starved me for 15 years. You hollowed 1,000 innocent souls. All for this. All for you, Morwenna crooned. Come then. Come and take me. Let's finish it. And the darkness attacked. Light and shadow met with a sound like the world tearing. Liora felt the weight of it in her bones, 15 years of harvested souls crashing against her, vast and cold and crushing. And for a terrible moment, she buckled beneath it. She's stronger than me, the old drowning voice whispered. She's had 15 years and I've had 3 days and she's... You are not fighting alone. Renaud's voice through the bond. Not magic. Something deeper. Love and faith and the fierce golden certainty of a soul that had chosen her and would go on choosing her past the end of the world. And Liora anchored now, at last, in herself and in him both stopped buckling and pushed back. She thought of her mother's sacrifice, her father's foolish, beautiful courage. She thought of Rena gripping a fire iron, with both shaking hands refusing to run. She thought of a king who had told her she could leave, even when leaving would have ended his line. She thought of every person who had ever chosen love over fear. And she burned. The light that erupted from her was not silver anymore. It was gold. The pure, warm, impossible radiance of the sun itself rising in the dead of a winter night, and it tore through Morwenna's darkness like dawn, tears through a nightmare. Shadows unraveled. Stolen souls broke free by the dozen, the 100 rising all together into a sky gone suddenly blindingly bright. Morwenna screamed, the predator at the very last becoming prey. She turned to flee, but there were no shadows left to flee into. Please, she rasped, shrinking, the darkness peeling off her in ribbons. Please, I'm your family. I'm the only family you have left. My family loved me. My family died to protect me. The gold light gathered in Liora's raised hand. You are only the monster who destroyed them. And she lifted her palm to end it. Wait, Rena. Stumbling through the ruined garden, her round face streaked with soot and tears. Liora, wait, there's something you have to know. The binding your mother made, it wasn't only to hide your light. When Morwenna killed her, she caught it. Part of your mother's soul, her essence. That's what's been feeding the Hollow Ones all these years. Rena's voice broke. Your mother's soul is trapped inside her, Liora. It has been trapped inside her the whole time. The gold light froze in Liora's hand, and she looked at her aunt with her terrible new eyes, and she saw it. There, beneath the boiling darkness, a single flickering thread of silver, struggling, exhausted, unbearably familiar. Warm. Her mother. Still there. Still suffering. After 15 years. If you destroy me, Morwenna hissed, and even now, even dying, there was triumph in it. You destroy her too. You end her forever. Your precious mother gone by your own hand. The choice landed on Liora like a mountain. Kill the monster and murder her mother's soul in the same breath. Or spare the monster and leave her mother trapped in the dark, forever feeding an endless harvest of the dead. And Renaud's voice quiet through the bond. Whatever you choose, I stand with you. Whatever it is. Leora closed her eyes, and she felt it again, that touch. Gentle, familiar, reaching up out of the darkness inside her aunt, my darling girl. Her eyes flew open, and there, within the gold light, the silver thread was gathering itself, pulling free, coalescing once more into the shape of the woman who had given her life twice now, once in birth and once in death. Mother, you've already saved me. Her mother's shining face was full of a joy so pure it hurt to look at. By waking your light, you weakened her chains. I can finally break them. But I cannot stay, my love. My time ended 15 years ago. I stayed only for you, only ever for you. Then come with me. Leora was weeping again, the gold light shaking around her. Please, I only just found you. Please don't. I never left. Silver fingers, warm and weightless, brushed her cheek one last time. I was in every sunrise you ever watched, every beam of moonlight through your window, every dream where for no reason you could name, you woke up feeling like you were home. I was there, Leora. I was always there, and I always will be. I love you, Leora sobbed. I love you. I love you. I know, my darling. Her mother smiled, dissolving now silver light, unspooling gently into the gold. I always knew. And then, before she went, the light that had been. Leora's mother turned one last time to face the darkness that had held her captive for 15 years. To face Morwenna. And she said a thing that Leora would carry in her chest for the rest of her long life. Morwenna, I forgive you, not for your sake, for mine, because I will not spend my last breath carrying you. I lay you down. The silver light poured out and merged with Leora's gold, and the two of them, mother and daughter, light and light, blazed together so bright that the winter night turned briefly, impossibly, into noon. It rolled out across the whole kingdom, over the sleeping villages, over the mountains, over every dark and frightened corner of Caldris, a wave of pure and total radiance, warm as a mother's arms, that touched every soul it passed and left behind it only peace. When it faded, Morwenna was gone. Not destroyed, transformed. Where the monster had stood there grew now a single small flower, silver-petaled, glowing faintly in the dark. A soul too corrupted to be freed, given instead a prison of quiet beauty. Held gently for as long as it needed holding, and Leora Ashvane sank to her knees in the ruined garden spent, and finally whole. Arms caught her. I have you, Renaud whispered into her hair, his voice thick with tears. I have you, my light. She turned her face into his chest, and wept for the mother she had known for the length of a single dying breath, for the 15 stolen years, for the child who had gone hungry, believing she was nothing. And Renaud held her through all of it, and did not once tell her to stop, and asked nothing of her, but that she let herself be held. That was the whole of it. That was everything she had ever needed, and never once been given until now. Is it over? She asked at last. The battle is over. He pressed his lips to her hair. The rest of it. She felt him smile. The rest of it is only just beginning. Dawn came to Caldris in ribbons of rose and gold. Leora stood on the high balcony of the king's tower. Their tower now, though she was still learning to let herself think the word, and watched the light spill across a kingdom that would never be quite the same. You should be resting. Renaud murmured, his arms folding around her from behind. Through the bond whole and settled and quiet, Now she felt his contentment wrap around her like a second warmth. I couldn't sleep. She leaned back into him. Too much to hold. Too much to feel. His lips found the place on her throat, where a mark had never in the end needed to be made. The council wants an audience. They have questions about what you are, about whether a luminary can truly sit the throne, about whether the queen might set them on fire if they annoy her. She felt him laugh low against her back. Lord Greaves has been remarkably polite this morning. Good. She smiled out at the dawn. He was rude to me. Renaud turned her gently in his arms and looked at her, and the look on his face was a thing she knew she would spend the rest of her life failing to get used to. How are you? He asked. Truly. She considered it, honestly, the way she had learned these last days to consider everything. I'm grieving, she said, for a mother I only met once. For 15 years I'll never get back, for the little girl who went to bed hungry, believing she deserved it. Her eyes filled, but she was smiling. And I'm grateful, because that same little girl grew up and collapsed in a ballroom, and the most powerful man in the kingdom crossed a room full of nobles to catch her. And wouldn't let go, Renaud said softly, and wouldn't let go. She reached up and touched his face. You knew, didn't you, from the very first moment? My wolf knew. His golden eyes were warm. The rest of me only had to catch up. He caught her hand and pressed his lips to her palm, to the place where her light still faintly glowed. And now I thank the moon every hour that sent you stumbling into my arms. I cannot imagine a single day of my life you are not standing in it. Renaud. Leora. I choose you. She said it clearly, steadily, so there would be no mistaking it, not for him, not for herself, not for the bond, not for anyone. Not because of the mark, not because of the moon, or the prophecy, or the thread that ties us. I could hear my own heart at the end. Underneath all of it, the way you promised me I would. Her voice trembled and held, and it chose you, on its own, freely. That's what I need you to know. Whatever the moon decided, I would have chosen you anyway. Something in his face broke open, and behind it was a boy who had spent his whole armored life waiting to be chosen for himself and not for his crown. Leora Ashvane, he said, unsteady. I loved you when you were a starving girl who dared to snap at a king. I loved you when you trembled in my arms and told me to leave. I loved you when you ran alone toward the dark to save a friend. He rested his forehead against hers. And I will love you every single day the moon gives us, and every day after, if she gives us those too. I accept, she whispered, on one condition. Name it. Love me even on the days I feel like no one. Her voice was very quiet. There will be days still. I know there will. Days the old lie comes back and tells me I'm nothing. I need to know you'll be there on those days, too. He gathered her in. Especially on those days, he said against her hair. Those are the days I was made for. And when he kissed her in the rose and gold of that first true morning, Leora felt the bond sing with a completion that had nothing to do with power or prophecy or the will of any moon. Two souls freely chosen. A king who had found his light, and a woman who had at long and hungry last found her way home, not to him, though she loved him past all sense, home to herself. And far below, in the ruined garden, where a monster had fallen beside the silver flower that held a corrupted soul in gentle keeping, A single moonflower bloomed in the growing light. Its petals shimmered with the same soft radiance that now lived and would always live behind Lyora's eyes, her mother's last gift. A reminder blooming quietly at the foot of the tower for anyone who ever passed and had eyes to see it. That love does not end when a life does. That the ones who go on ahead of us are never truly gone. And that no soul, not one, not ever, not yours, not mine, not the hungry girl's who thinks nobody sees her, has ever needed to be chosen by anyone at all. To have been all along enough.